Live on News 24, you're watching Sharri.
Tonight, Anthony Fauci, the face of the pandemic, pleads the fifth 111 times. Well, you don't plead the fifth if you're innocent. We'll cross to the US and unravel Fauci's cover-ups and secrets. The Safety Commissioner refuses to condemn the ABC for its violent segment on Gina Rinehart. Nationals leader Matt Canavan will be on the show to tear into the hypocrisy. And divorce rates are up in the past year and fewer couples are tying the knot. Demographer Mark McCrindle will explain where the love has gone a little later. But first, we were expecting a showdown today when Anthony Fauci fronted the United States Senate. We hoped for some accountability, even answers. But Fauci farcically pleaded the fifth 111 times. Yes, 111.
Although it pains me to do so, because of the respect I have for the legislative branch of government and my decades-long record of cooperating with Congress, under the advice of my attorneys, I will invoke my right under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution to refrain from answering your questions. On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution. Under the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
The only reason he would plead the fifth is to avoid self-incrimination, because he's worried about being thrown in jail. But this is the man who devised the entire COVID strategy of vaccinations, lockdowns, who covered up the likely lab origin of the virus. And he clearly has a lot to hide. Otherwise, he'd be up front. He'd answer the questions. But he took the fifth on the advice of his extremely expensive legal counsel. His non-answers became so farcical that one senator asked him this series of questions.
Let's try something. What day of the week is it today? What color tie you're wearing? What color's the carpet in front of you?
And he took the fifth on each occasion. Now, this is the man who the world was relying on for its supposedly expert medical advice. Fauci's very real fear of being prosecuted, in part for secretly funding risky research in Wuhan and then covering it up, is why President Joe Biden pardoned him, with the pardon stretching back to 2014. And Fauci was asked about this pardon today.
This is the pardon you have heard so much about. This pardon goes back to, and if you'll see, January the 1st of 2014. Did you talk to President Biden and ask for this pardon? I'm just very interested why it was this date. Did it have anything to do with the fact that 2014 was also the year that the NIAID or NIH began funding EcoHealth Alliance's Understanding the Risk of Bat Coronavirus Emergence grant?
Now, these are revelations that we first exposed right here. I reported that the Wuhan Institute of Virology was conducting risky research in this front page in April 2020. And that was the first of many front pages on this topic over 6 years ago. But then I was shocked to discover that this research was being funded by America. And one of our reports said that Anthony Fauci's National Institute of Health and other US agencies funded 65 scientific projects at the Wuhan Institute of Virology over the past decade, many involving risky research on bat coronaviruses. The American funding was flowing through to the Wuhan lab, which houses the world's largest collection of coronavirus samples, even when gain-of-function research was banned in the United States. So Fauci was funneling the money through another group called the EcoHealth Alliance. He knew the risks. He knew them personally. And we know that he did because he admitted it in this little-known interview.
So it was incumbent upon us to study the animal-human interface and to understand what potential these viruses have of infecting humans, which then might damage the United States. Please let me finish. So you don't want to go to Hoboken, New Jersey, or to Fairfax, Virginia, to be studying the bat-human interface that might lead to an outbreak. So you go to China.
I mean, that is just such a crucial sentence. You don't want to go to Hoboken, New Jersey to study the bat-to-human interface. You go to China. So that is where the top public health official in America did this risky coronavirus research, in China. Because as he said there, he was worried about an outbreak. The problem, of course, is that viruses spread globally. And the COVID-19 outbreak, of course, wasn't limited to China. It reached every corner of the earth, something Fauci should have known. But he argued way back in 2012, in this paper I discovered, that gain-of-function research was worth the risk of sparking a pandemic. His own words. He wrote in the American Society for Microbiology in October 2012, he said this: "In an unlikely but conceivable turn of events, what if that scientist becomes infected with the virus, which leads to an outbreak and ultimately triggers a pandemic?" He said scientists working in this field might say, as indeed I have said, that the benefits of such experiments and the resulting knowledge outweigh the risks. And he also said that within the research community, many have expressed concern that important research progress could come to a halt just because of the fear that someone somewhere might attempt to replicate these experiments sloppily. So Fauci was at the forefront of arguing for this risky research, even if it led to a pandemic, which my research suggests that's exactly what happened. It led to the creation of the pandemic, global shutdowns, and then millions of deaths. Now, Rand Paul, the senator who uncovered, who subpoenaed Fauci's personal diaries, well, he tried to ask Fauci about all of this today.
Do you think that the risks really are worth the benefits for gain-of-function research?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
And on it went. I mean, it's too tedious to play the 111 times he said that. But Fauci was also involved in silencing the lab leak theory by having a group of scientists write an academic paper claiming that the virus was of natural origin. But their private emails told a different story. They were unconvinced. And Fauci also lifted the ban on risky gain-of-function research, the ban that had been in place since the Obama era. And he didn't seem to tell anyone that he'd done this. Are you concerned at all about how it happened that the gain-of-function ban was lifted during the Trump administration? How was it that Anthony Fauci was able to do this without anyone knowing?
Well, I don't know for sure who all was involved in that decision-making process. I can say this much. When we look back and figure out how that decision was made, I hope that all of those parties were able to come to the table, express their viewpoints, their concerns, so that we had not only a decision, but an informed decision that was made. I've seen very little evidence to date that there was a broad-based information exchange before the decision was made by Dr. Fauci to lift that ban on gain-of-function research.
And that was Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, but even President Trump was none the wiser about why Fauci had lifted this ban on the dangerous research or why he was doing it in China. Mr. President Anthony Fauci, did he ever once mention to you that the Wuhan Institute of Virology was genetically manipulating coronaviruses?
Well, no, he didn't. And, you know, Anthony's been in government for many, many years. He's a bureaucratic kind of a guy, a very great promoter. I give him an A+ as a promoter and probably a C or a D as a doctor.
We now know from emails that have been released under the Freedom of Information Act that he was getting his advice from the likes of Peter Daszak, a Wuhan collaborator. At the same time, he was telling you that this was a natural virus, while at the same time, behind the scenes in emails, he was having discussions about whether this might have been genetically manipulated. Does that shock you?
Well, he was dealing with them, certainly. And my thing was a little bit different. I just wanted to stop it. Whether it developed one way or the other, I just wanted to stop it.
But it's important to know where it came from. It's extremely important to know how it developed.
Fauci was dealing with them, and I guess they were even making payments for certain kinds of research. And I ended that, too. I stopped that. When we found out about that, he was doing that during the Obama years. And when I found out about it, I said, can you imagine that the United States is making payments to a Chinese lab? So just that on its face didn't make sense, but I stopped that.
The Obama administration did hit pause on gain-of-function research, though, and that was lifted under your watch. Why did you allow the gain-of-function research to continue?
Well, I think probably people that worked for me looked at it, and at one point they might have done that. But ultimately, what we did was we shut it off. We shut the whole thing off, and we stopped making payments that were approved much earlier than our administration.
Do you regret now not paying closer attention? I mean, this gain-of-function research is extremely risky, you know, banned under the Obama administration and then kick-started in 2017 under your watch.
Yeah, no, I think we've done an incredible job between the vaccine and between all of the Operation Warp Speed. I think we did a great job, and people are now starting to see what a great job we did.
I think President Trump is much more across the detail now, and in his current term, he actually signed an executive order banning gain-of-function research. But there's so much detail to this story, so many questions that need answers, more documents that need to emerge. But given Fauci's refusal to answer questions today, it seems he wants to take those answers to the grave. He seems disinterested in accountability, integrity, honesty, or transparency. As his diary entries suggest, he was mostly attracted to the fame, fortune, and celebrity. Instead of worrying more about the death toll, he was excited about how well attended his pandemic press conferences would be. But Fauci isn't the only one escaping scrutiny. Where has been the attempt to seek answers from the Chinese government? I doubt our Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has ever raised this issue with Chinese President Xi Jinping, despite their numerous cosy meets, quite chummy. The only reason Australia's relationship with China soured in the first place was because Scott Morrison dared to suggest there should be an inquiry into how the virus started. He had courage and common sense. Albanese has neither. And for anyone who suggests the origin question isn't important, well, it most certainly is, both for justice for the victims and to ensure this never happens again. I mean, you think of a virus like COVID-19 led to global shutdowns and millions of deaths. Imagine the terrible damage a far more deadly virus could wreak. And for those who might want to watch that documentary again, News24 is running it, What Really Happened in Wuhan, this Saturday at 6:30 p.m. All right, for more on this now, I'm joined by GB News US correspondent and a big follower of Fauci's case, Ben Leo. Ben, thank you so much for your time. Look, only 4 years ago, have a look at what Fauci said.
I am very happy to testify before any congressional oversight committee. I'm going to do what I need to do, and that is cooperate fully, because we have nothing to hide at all.
Yeah, he had nothing to hide at all then, Ben, but, you know, 111 times pleading the fifth, he must have something to hide now.
Yeah, hey, Sharri, good to be with you. Yeah, isn't it ironic? From I am the science to I am the silence in just a couple of years. Fauci is now also, by the way, quite funny, if it, disturbing as well, a fan of constitutional rights when, just 5 or 6 years ago, he was the one who was making up social distancing rules, happy to have 2, 3, 4-year-old children masked in nurseries all across America, in preschools, kindergartens. But that's the thing with the truth. They always say it's the sort of the age-old adage, which is, what's the difference between a conspiracy theory and the truth? Normally, it's about 6 months. In this case, it's 6 years. But Anthony Fauci shouldn't be the only person up for the chopping block when it comes to being quizzed and interrogated on what happened during COVID. As you rightly said, economies destroyed, and they're still feeling the effects now, completely destroyed. Children's education, finance. The United States, for example, they printed a third, get this, a third of their entire US money supply in just 2 years, in just 24 months. And people wonder why the world is now ravaged by inflation. You had in Australia, Sharri, the likes of who we called, and maybe you did as well, Dictator Dan Andrews, the Premier of Victoria. He needs to be put forward in front of a committee to answer questions. Chris Whitty, the UK medical chief here in England, who was also pushing all this nonsense as well. The likes of Jacinda Ardern back in the day, who, if you remember, she took to the cameras and said, the only source of truth when it comes to COVID is from the government. Everybody else should be shunned. And this is what Fauci did. He ran a network, a cabal of paid-for cronies and corporations to silence dissenters through fear, with money, through dodgy partnerships, to ensure that only his way of going forward with COVID was acceptable. Anybody else, for example, the authors of the Great Barrington Declaration, which was a worldwide declaration talking about the possibility of herd immunity, everybody who signed that, and indeed Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, was exiled from the scientific community. Again, Fauci said, and what a joke it is now looking back at this, Fauci said, I am the science. He's not the science, he's a liar. He's a weasel. He's got a track record of doing some extraordinary, disgusting experiments. For example, I mean, excuse me for the detail on this, but using aborted baby scalps to sew onto the back of mice to see if their hair would grow. He is an evil man, and he's a tyrant, Sharri.
I saw he was questioned by one of the senators on that today, but I actually hadn't heard of that before, so I've been meaning to go and look into that and fact check it. Ben, his diaries, I mean, you mentioned the vaccination program there. Fauci's newly released private diaries also contain a mention of the adverse reaction he had to the vaccine after he took it on live television, but he'd never made that public before. I mean, do you think, I want to get through a few different things with you, so just quickly, do you think this is something he should have been upfront with the rest of the world?
Absolutely. You want to talk about transparency and truth? He got a pulmonary infection from his Moderna vaccine, which was one of the main side effects. Also potentially causes myocarditis, which Fauci wrote that he was suffering from. He didn't tell the American people anything. In fact, he went back on the airwaves and told people that if they didn't get injected with this so-called vaccine to protect Granny, then they were the shame of the United States. And by the way, just to add to that, Pfizer, again, Fauci never told you this, Pfizer, for example, never even tested for transmission. So governments all around the world knew this, Sharri.
Yeah. Look, Fauci today was hiding behind his attorney so extensively, and even the lawyer started giving testimony at one point that he was then sensationally kicked out of the hearing. Have a look.
And now you're disrupting the proceedings. And so, look, this is the way Anthony Fauci wants to be remembered. Security, please remove him from the room. Let the record state that Dr. Fauci will still have the advice of the other half a dozen attorneys that he brought along today.
I mean, that was quite the moment. But, Ben, no highly paid lawyers can save Fauci here. The only thing that can is if he is upfront.
Yeah, will he be up front? I mean, we have his diaries courtesy of RFK Jr., who, I mean, Fauci, in his stupidity, for somebody who thought he was a genius and loved worldwide, he wrote those diaries on government servers. And that's why Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was able to access them. So he's not as clever as he thinks he is. The only thing he's got in his pocket, Sharri, is, as you've mentioned, this pardon from Joe Biden. Why was he pardoned if he did nothing wrong? And why did that pardon go all the way back to 2014, as you quite rightly said, which was the year that Fauci's National Institute of Health started gain-of-function research in China. So if you've got nothing to hide, and as you showed in that clip, he said he'd go in front of a congressional committee anytime. If you've got nothing to hide, you'd go there and you'd be honest and open up to answers. But do you know what? By pleading the fifth 111 times, by staying silent yesterday in Congress just down the road, he answered all the questions we had anyway. By staying silent, he's answered them all, Sharri.
I mean, it's a pity in a way that the US senators didn't anticipate that he might have pleaded the fifth, because there is an argument that given he has this pardon from Biden, that he can't then go and plead the fifth because the pardon already protects him from any, self-incrimination. But it didn't seem like they were prepared with that argument. Ben, Fauci also refused to answer questions about using government employees to solicit around $1 million in cash awards. So that was pretty interesting as well, that he made money from the pandemic. And it was, I shuddered to read the detail of the sort of organisations around the world that gave him so much money for his courage and leadership during the pandemic.
Yeah, well, look, this happens, and this is a pertinent point, actually. This happens with all leading corporations, pharmaceutical companies, people like Dr. Anthony Fauci, who are so entwined with not just their government work, with massive corporations as well. Money's flowing back and forth between different organisations, different companies. If you look at Jonathan Van Tam, who is the Deputy Chief Medical Officer here in England, he was leading the charge with Chris Whitty during COVID, doing the same sorts of stuff that Fauci was. Get vaccinated, even if you don't need it, your health profile doesn't fit because you need to protect Granny. Where's he working now, Sharri? Any guesses? He's working at Moderna in a massive consultancy role on millions and millions of pounds. So follow the money in all of this. And I will say, as a last point, what else could this be happening with? Which other topics or policies or issues of today where we're looking at scientists, leading scientists like Anthony Fauci was considered 5-6 years ago, the leading experts of the world who are pushing certain policies or topics? Let's talk about climate change. And who are the voices who are dissenting, who are being silenced? Just something to think about.
No, I agree. And for me personally, because I spent, more than 2 years unravelling every piece of it when the authorities were telling you something completely different. I mean, you just have to question everything. You can't really believe, it's a terrible thing to say, but, you do. You have to question everything, establish the facts for yourself as a journalist in any case. All right, Ben Leo, thanks for your time. And I'm going to come back to that topic with US Right to Know co-founder Gary Ruskin a bit later. He's spent the past 6 years pursuing the truth through the courts. But now let's get to some of the other big news today. And Albanese government ministers are defending themselves over the way they politicised and weaponised Brittany Higgins' rape.
The Commonwealth has settled a workplace lawsuit brought by Fiona Brown in relation to the Brittany Higgins allegations. Do you and other senior members of Labor have any regrets over the way that you handled that matter and the allegations that were around at that time?
I think the questions we asked during that time were entirely appropriate.
And Katie Gallagher, as you'll recall, was one of the key ministers who pushed the allegations of a cover-up. Allegations that turned out to be completely false.
You're the person who has avoided, out of all of this, has avoided answering or providing information about your state of knowledge or any facts related to this matter.
Senator Gallagher, one of your...
How dare you?
Order. Now we will move...
It's all about protecting yourself.
Just awful, the way they behaved. All right, let's bring in tonight's panel, News24 host Kayla Bond and former Liberal Senator Holly Hughes. Great to see you both. Holly, this was clearly weaponised against the then Morrison government, but no apology or contrition.
No, it was disgusting. And I was in that estimates hearings that Katie Gallagher and Penny Wong came into. They had never bothered to turn up to a Community Affairs Senate budget estimates hearing ever. And then they came in and launched an assault on Senator Reynolds. That assault continued in the Senate chamber for months on end until Linda suffered incredible health consequences from the sustained attacks. What was done to Fiona Brown was appalling. This needed to be settled. It should have been settled years ago. They still need to settle Linda Reynolds' claim. Their behaviour as a government has been disgusting. So many people's lives have been ruined, and they knew exactly what they were doing, and we know that more and more as the court cases unravel.
Caleb, also no transparency over that $2.4 million payment to Brittany Higgins.
Indeed. The whole thing stinks, right? The reason that Katie Gallagher won't apologise is because she doesn't feel she needs to apologise, because it did exactly what she and others in the Labor Party wanted it to do, which was that it created a hit for the Morrison government at the time. They weaponised what was at the time an alleged rape for political means, and they got what they wanted out of it. They managed to ruin Linda Reynolds' career and her health in the process, as Holly has just mentioned. They ruined Fiona Brown's career. They did damage to the Morrison government. In Ms Gallagher's mind, this was simply what had to be done. So, no, she'll never apologise for it. They won't apologise nor give us any detail about the $2.4 million that was handed over to Brittany Higgins, and they never will, because, again, it just cleaned up that issue for them very conveniently. The cost was really of no concern to them. I mean, this was the mean girls in full action, and they will never be held accountable, I suspect.
And of course, I mean, too long to go into, but this, of course, linked into how they allegedly treated the late Senator Kimberly Kitching, who is said to have tried to warn Linda Reynolds about what was going on, and then Kimberly Kitching felt that she was bullied in return. All right, well, let's look at this ISIS fighters and the return of the ISIS fighters. Now, Pauline Hanson has sent crossbenchers a 22-page plan to stop the return of the ISIS fighters. This was exposed in the Australian today. The plan would do a few things. It would create a foreign terrorist fighter exclusion order. It would stop the automatic issue of return permits while the court is considering a case. It would make it harder to get bail for terror offences, and would also block passports for anyone on an exclusion order. Now, Pauline claims this is court-proof, but the Home Affairs Minister, Tony Burke, had this to say.
On all the advice that I've had, something like what's being proposed here would last about 30 seconds in the High Court. Every country in the world has to accept back its own citizens.
I mean, Holly, you're officially one nation now. What do you think of Pauline's plan?
Well, I think what she's saying and what is really important is temporary exclusion orders have never even been tested in the court. So the fact that Tony Burke's saying the High Court would throw it out in 30 seconds, he has absolutely no idea about that. Exclusion orders can be issued for 2 years and they can be rolling exclusion orders. So they effectively can keep these people out of the country already, yet this government is more concerned about votes in southwest Sydney and saving the backsides of Burke, Bowen and others in the southwest Sydney area than they are about protecting Australians from these ISIS sympathising Islamic extremists. It's absolutely appalling the way this government is conducting itself. And if they think the High Court should throw it out, I'd be more interested. I'm going to put money on it that they will not even let this bill go forward into an inquiry or potentially even through the procedural stage into a debate, because that is the cowards that this Labor government that will cosy up with the Greens will do.
I mean, Caleb, it seems like the government's not willing to try different things, different options, because they just say the High Court would throw it out. And it might, but the laws need to be tested because, I mean, surely the government should be exploring all options to stop ISIS fighters, actual male fighters, from returning, particularly after the terror attacks we've had here.
Well, indeed, and those on the peripheries as well, not just the fighters, you know, the women that we've seen come back. I mean, we're talking now about a guy that we thought who was dead, the jihadi doctor. You know, none of these people, as far as I'm concerned, should ever be allowed back into the country. And as Holly accurately notes, you know, we have means by which we can already do this with the temporary exclusion orders. The government simply doesn't want to do it. So for Tony Burke to say, oh, well, you know, this proposal from Pauline Hanson and One Nation wouldn't last 30 seconds in the High Court. Well, why don't you come up with another plan? I mean, if you're telling me you know it won't last 30 seconds, come up with something that will withstand the High Court or might even last a minute as opposed to 30 seconds in the High Court, and let's give it a shot. But they don't want to do it. The point is that they don't want to stop these people from coming back to the country, and they will take no effort to do so because, as Holly notes, it's somewhat in their interests to genuflect to some people in Western Sydney and say, look, you know, we'll let you have mum or whoever come back to the country and go about your life, because they don't want to deal with the consequences, potential fallout of some ethnic communities. It is just a cop-out.
Look, Caleb, I mean, you know, I'm so critical of this government. I don't think they actually want the ISIS fighters to come home. I don't think they do. I mean, from their perspective, it would probably just cause a media headache. But I don't think they are putting anywhere near enough effort, I mean, virtually no effort, into stopping them coming back. I think that's the distinction.
They're unwilling is probably another way to put it.
Yeah. All right, let's have a quick look at Victorian politics. It was day 2 for the new Premier, Ben Carroll. It wasn't much better than his first day, though, with 2 ministers resigning from Cabinet, confirming they won't be recontesting the election in November. I mean, Holly, if this was the Liberals, right, because these are 2 women who resigned, plus the female Premier was overthrown. So if this was the Liberals, the Labor Party would be accusing them of having a women problem.
Oh, God. I mean, if they didn't have double standards, they wouldn't have any standards at all, these people. And we know that. I mean, good riddance to both those ministers and Jacinta Allen. Ben Carroll was a senior minister in the cabinet of Andrews and Allen. He's just as complicit as the rest of them. I just absolutely cross my fingers that the Liberal Party doesn't manage to inflict another own goal on themselves between now and November, and that this government actually gets tossed out. They are destroying Victoria, and Australia as a whole can't afford to keep bailing them out.
Well, Jess Wilson does seem like she's working very hard. Caleb, this does look like rats leaving a sinking ship, though. You know, new Premier, 2 days later, resignations.
Oh, of course it does. I mean, they can probably see the writing on the wall, and good on them. But I am glad that it is in some way dismantling some of the final vestiges of that Andrews era. I mean, Lily D'Ambrosio was the only minister left who had served in the original ones that Dan Andrews had picked in 2014. Of course, many of them left along the way for various problems that they came across. So if you've got 2 people who are very close to Allen and Andrews saying, we now want to leave Parliament, you know what? Good riddance, sayonara.
Indeed. All right, Caleb, Holly, great to see you both. Still to come, why the divorce rates are rising and marriages are falling, with demographer Mark McCrindle. Plus, more on Fauci's tongue-tied appearance before the US Senate with the man who's been fighting for 6 years for the release of documents. That's next. And returning to tonight's top story, Anthony Fauci, the architect of the pandemic response, refusing to answer a single question in the US Senate. Well, Gary Ruskin runs a not-for-profit group called Right to Know, and he's spent millions of dollars pursuing Fauci's agency, intelligence agencies and others in the courts, trying to obtain documents to find the truth about the origins of the virus. He's in California, and I spoke with him a little earlier. Gary Ruskin, thank you so much for your time. We were expecting a showdown today with perhaps even some accountability. Were you shocked when Anthony Fauci farcically pleaded the Fifth some 111 times?
You know, I was really disappointed, but I was not surprised. We've seen Anthony Fauci kind of try to duck questions and stick to fora that that are favorable to him for year after year after year. And so it's unsurprising that when the questioning got hot and there were a lot of facts to ask him about, he just wouldn't answer the questions.
Well, let's look at what Fauci actually does need to answer for. Firstly, as it relates to the origins of the virus and his agency's funding of risky gain-of-function research in the Wuhan Institute of Virology, funneled through EcoHealth Alliance. And we also saw his panicked emails when the virus first broke out. He was worried about the sort of research that the NIH had been funding in Wuhan.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, there are so many things that Fauci and his colleague Francis Collins have to be held accountable for. Still not yet. I mean, there was the longstanding effort by Fauci and Collins to deny a research-related origin of SARS-CoV-2, even though it's perfectly obvious now that we've seen Fauci's diaries that he knew that this was a real possibility. There was a failure to obey the law in responding to Freedom of Information Act requests. There was use of private email accounts to conduct private business. Fauci told Collins and others to destroy email. We still don't know exactly what was happening in the NIH FOIA office to hide and bury documents. Fauci had a senior advisor named David Morenz, who has been charged with illegal obfuscation of his records, many of which relate to the origins of COVID-19. I've been doing public interest work for nearly 40 years now, and in my whole life, NIH is the worst agency at stonewalling obfuscation regarding the origins of SARS-CoV-2 that I've ever seen. And so in addition to what you brought up, there's this whole kind of extensive effort to obfuscate and misdirect. And, you know, it goes on.
So, Gary, looking at Fauci's diary specifically, what did you think was new or interesting from those entries?
Yeah, to me, there were two things. You know, first was there was a glaring disconnect between Fauci's early statement in the diary about how the seafood market was the amplifier, not the source of the virus, which is suggestive of a lab origin of SARS-CoV-2, and his later repeated strong stance in support of natural origin of the coronavirus. And then there was also this glaring disconnect between the advice that he was given in the key scientist teleconferences in early February that the novel coronavirus may have had a lab origin. This is what they were telling him, and that there was possible deliberate insertion of a furin cleavage site. But you know, you contrast that with his later support of a high likelihood of natural origin of the coronavirus. And so those were the two things that jumped out to me.
I mean, given the extent of your fight over this and how the world was deceived, we were told any suggestion of a lab origin, a research origin of the virus was a conspiracy. I mean, how do you feel when Fauci pleads the fifth instead of answering serious questions?
Well, again, I'm just not that surprised by it. You know, I mean, I've been wondering for quite a while if this day would come. But I think the more important point is just after so many lies and so much deceit for so many years, you know, the public just will not stand for hand waving and gestures. Like, we want to read the documents ourselves, and so it's time for the federal agencies and it's time for Congress to produce all the documents that they have about the origins of COVID-19. You know, President Trump and his administration promised us maximum transparency on these issues, and where is it?
So what documents precisely do you think the public still needs to see?
So I think that the most interesting ones are ones that are being held by the intelligence community, especially the CIA and the Office of Director of National Intelligence. You know, we have many FOIA requests, some FOIA litigation right now, targeting those agencies and the secrets that they hold. But it's long past time for Congress to pry those loose and for the Trump administration to walk its talk and give us the maximum transparency that they promised us.
Gary Raskin, thank you so much. I appreciate your time and, of course, your incredible commitment to this issue over, 6 or 7 years now?
Okay, that's good. Okay, take care of yourself.
Still to come, crickets from Albanese after one of his Labor MPs was accused of assault. I'll talk about that with Nationals leader Matt Canavan. Plus, where is the love gone? Demographer Mike McCrindle will join us after the break. Welcome back. Nationals leader Matt Canavan coming up in just a moment. But first, new ABS statistics suggest that fewer couples are choosing to get married, while the divorce rate has risen over the past year. The Daily Telegraph's Jason Morrison reports that ABS figures reveal 49,000 divorces were granted in 2025, up on the previous year, while the number of marriages registered slipped slightly to 118,000. Put crudely, one marriage ended in divorce for roughly every 2.5 weddings held across the country last year. And demographer Mark McCrindle joins me now. Mark, good to see you again. So why do you think, just starting with the marriages first, why do you think fewer couples are getting married?
Well, you do get fluctuations in both the marriage numbers and the divorce numbers. Costs do have something to do with it. And marriage, particularly for Australians, the majority of whom cohabitate prior to marriage, it is something that they can kick down the road a little bit. And so you do, when there are cost challenges, see a few changes around the marriage numbers and, for that matter, divorces as well.
Yeah, so that's what I was going to ask you. You know, divorce rate is said to be the highest since the pandemic. And of course, it changes according to your measurements, but the highest since the pandemic and has risen over the past year. Are there other reasons for this, or again, is this just the cost of living crisis and economic pressures that are putting pressure on families?
Well, the long-term trend for the divorces is down, which is encouraging. In fact, there are a lot fewer divorces now. The divorce rate is about 1/3 less than it was just 20 years ago. So the long-term trends are for fewer divorces in terms of the divorce rate, and that leads to fewer divorces in number. Notwithstanding last year, there were a few more, but that's just a fluctuation. Those marriages that do end are lasting longer as well. So now the time from marriage to divorce for those that end is the longest it's ever been, more than 13 years. And now the majority of divorces no longer involve dependent children as well. Average age of those getting divorced is in the late 40s. So I think amidst all of this, there's some encouraging news. Yeah, partly that is that couples are staying together longer, maybe because of the cost of splitting up in terms of a house division. But overall, there is some good news around the divorce and length of time.
The 2026 census is coming up on August 11. And of course, this is when every person in the country has to answer some 66 questions about, their life, their ancestry, gender, etc. Now, there's been some controversy over the fact that the ABS didn't include a dedicated box for Judaism in the religion section. So Jews would have to write that in the other box. But Mark, I'm just interested to know whether Judaism has ever had its own dedicated tick box on the census.
No, it hasn't. And it is unfortunate because if a religion doesn't get a pick box there, it gets fewer adherents or recorded numbers, because you've got to get people to fill in what they are in the open text box. So it's a lot more convenient if that religion is there on the options. But the way the Australian Bureau of Statistics does it is in order of the number of respondents on the previous census. There are 10 options in the religion question, and the number one is no religion, because that's the most common, and then you've got Catholic, because that's number 2, and Anglican is number 3, and it goes all the way down the list. But after 10, because they don't want to have the form running on and on, they then stop that, and you have the other section, and people can write the answer in. So if Judaism was to go on the box there as an option in itself, if we were to follow that process of order, you'd also need to add Sikhism and Lutheran faith prior to that, because that's where it fits, roughly 13th on the list. So it would mean expanding the census form. When you look at it, it does seem odd, because there's a box for Islam and Buddhism and Hinduism, and there's a box for Catholic and Protestant options as well. And Judaism isn't there, but it's for those statistical reasons.
Are there any other changes or anything different in the census that you've noticed this year?
There are a few things. For the first time, it's not just the recording of one's sex, but gender is there as well. There's a new question on sexual orientation, so there's some new approaches. There's 4 options when it comes to ancestry, because a lot more people are looking back in their history, not just 2 ancestries as we've seen in the past. And in terms of how you got to work, even e-bike is an option. So a few little responses to the changes over time, and particularly since 5 years from the last one.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, just on the Jewish community front, I'm so torn on this, because, the community does rely on census data to secure funding and plan social infrastructure. But on the other hand, a lot of Jews don't feel comfortable filling out a government form with their religion. I've certainly never done it, which is a bit, ironic, because I tell everyone I'm Jewish on air. But, you just don't want the government to have a form. And there's a lot of people like that. So, you don't know the true size of the community. I think it's larger than the official figures. Anyway, Mark McCrindle, thank you for your time.
Thanks.
All right, still to come. Oh, and just before we go to the break, very quickly, I want to say congratulations to artist Michael Zavros for his beautiful portrait of Jewish leader Alex Rifkin, which today won the People's Prize at the Archibald. I mean, the pair joked about how they look similar, but this is actually a very serious painting that reflects the trauma of our times as reflected in Alex's face. So wonderful that had that well-deserved prize. OK, still to come, Albanese's lacklustre response to a Labor MP charged with assault And the E-Safety Commissioner refuses to condemn the ABC for its violent segment on Gina Reinhart. All of that with Nationals leader Matt Canavan next. Welcome back, and let's bring in now live Nationals leader Matt Canavan. Matt, wonderful to see you again. Look, I want to get your view on the fact that the Albanese government is still standing by, refusing to stand down this Labor MP Luke Gosling charged with assault.
Look, I find it quite extraordinary, Sharri. These are extremely serious allegations. They come with a potential jail term of 14 years. They are allegations or now criminal charges, so I'm not going to comment on the particulars of them, but it would appear to me just basic prudence to step aside when something as serious as this has occurred. That doesn't, of course, admit guilt on behalf of any party, but when you're in these sort of positions, you've got to be devoted to them. Now Mr Gosling obviously has a task to do to defend the charges. If that's what he wants to do, he should be focused on that, and we deserve people involved in government that are focused on the Australian people. So I just think it would be prudent to step aside, wait for the legal process to finish before making a decision further on Mr Gosling's future. But look, the Prime Minister just constantly always just seems to defend his own team above and beyond good and due process. I don't think it's being followed in this case.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. It is the standard process. Someone would usually stand aside. Look, the E-Safety Commissioner, Julie Inman-Grant, who you're always holding to account, Matt, she's refused to condemn the ABC over its revolting segment on Gina Reinhart. I mean, why wouldn't she condemn something so obviously inappropriate?
Look, it absolutely just completely gobsmacks me, Sharri, that she couldn't do that. I mean, I'll do that. That was outrageous, what was broadcast on the ABC. A description of a violent act, not funny at all. It can't be dismissed as satire. Don't give me a break. In graphic detail, should never have aired on our public broadcaster. I see now the comedian, I think herself, I'm not even sure he or she, but they have apologised. The ABC should apologise. And the fact that Miss Grant often puts herself forward as judge, jury and executioner of all sorts of things that go on social media, how can she not make a judgment on this?
Yeah.
It's absolutely absurd.
Exactly.
It should be condemned by all good-thinking Australians, and the ABC should be held to account for it. It should never happen again.
Exactly. Look, speaking of Gina Reinhart, it's been reported that she's endorsing your plan, Matt, for the Fitzroy River to stage the rowing at the 2032 Brisbane Olympics. But, Matt, there's all this concern that there's actually crocodiles, saltwater crocs. Is that true?
Well, I live very close to this area, Sharri. My son rows on the river 3 or 4 times a week, as does many of his friends, and they do so year in, year out. There is a complete misnomer that crocodiles are an issue. Indeed, the state school championships for rowing in Queensland will be held on the Fitzroy River,
but
exactly where this Olympics course would be later this year. There's no issue. There's never been a fatality, a last attack reported.
But there are crocodiles?
Look, there are crocodiles further up, Sharri. Well, there are bull sharks in the Sydney River, in the Sydney Harbour. Did you see that footage last year with I think it was a crew from Riverview or one of the schools there in Sydney, had a bull shark just come right up near their boat. There are many more people lost to sharks.
But I just want to check what you're saying. So you're saying there are crocodiles in the river, but it's still safe to row? It's
perfectly safe. Yeah, because those crocs are managed and they're never in anywhere close to the proximity of where the rowing occurs.
You're
and
another breed in
there was a
Queensland,
problem,
Matt.
why would we host a state school championships there if it was an issue? I mean, we do that every year, almost every other year. It's perfectly safe. The Australian Olympic rowing team regularly use this part of the river, the Fitzroy River, to train in this area. So I know there's a lot of whole people in Brisbane who are very angry that regional Queensland's getting something and they're looking at every little hook to do so. I saw in the Australian today the reporting that somehow this part of the river is affected by tidal flows. Total rubbish. If anyone who's been in Rockhampton knows a barrage there that prevents the tides from going this part of the river.
All right,
and
Matt,
the reporting on this has been so out of whack, the regions deserve something too.
I want to use our last minute to get your view on Fauci today. No, you've been following that topic closely over the years.
Oh, yeah. Look, that was extraordinary. I mean, I saw a clip of him taking the fifth for about 20 minutes or so to all sorts of reasonable questions. I know you've been mentioning dispatches too there, Sharri, for the great work you did on this. And look, I think people deserve answers. So much occurred. So many people's lives were destroyed by it. It's very regrettable that we're not getting answers. We haven't got that in this country, and unfortunately, the American people don't seem to be getting that either through their legitimate congressional processes.
Yeah. He, more than anyone, he needs to answer questions about a whole lot of things, both the response and the origins of the virus, but he's just no accountability there. Matt Canavan, great to see you back again. You were away, I was away. And thanks for your company, everyone, this week on the show. I'll see you Monday at 8. And right now, Paul Murray.